Why is war profitable and not peace? There are people who fantasize a lot about peace and prosperity, but war will always be, from certain standpoints, the faster way to certain profits. Not your profits as a general living being, but the profits of superpowers. Because as a profit making power, a big power, a military power, relies obviously on its industrial complex, and therefore it will need more ammunition. If you see nowadays, it's quite commonplace that when a war starts and it is supported by a uh, military power, the war will last for a long time. No military superpower has an interest in ending that war fast, because a war is a means through which they have finally a means for rivalry. It is a means through which they have a reason for technological development, even if it is only militarily speaking. It is a means through which they can dispose of their old weaponry, and that takes obviously a lot of time. And then they can actually start producing in mass their new versions of the weapons of mass destruction. Because as a war progresses, you will see they will initially use old weaponry, and then slowly and surely they will become way more invested and more destructive capabilities are deployed. A war is profitable because, well, some people are apathic and they don't want you to learn. Yes, they want you to keep yourself distracted. They want to have more headlines about death and decay and the such. In case you have not observed yet, we live in a death cult society where your only purpose is to simply be purged one way or another, through tiredness, through diseases, through all things like that. And you are programmed to sabotage yourself constantly, each and every day, by pulling yourself down, by sabotaging, and by always worrying, which is something that reduces and even weakens your immunity system's response when it comes to contracting diseases. Yes, always thinking about fear, always worrying about things. Your whole body is more than just a few organs. It is a system, and that system functions also based on your emotional wave field. If this let's say state of emotion is chaotic, then obviously your body will feel in a chaotic way. This is unfortunately the situation of a lot of people. Though they are living in a situation where there's nothing necessarily prone to harm them and things are pretty peaceful around them, they still live in this state where they're constantly overwhelmed by too much information. They are chaotic within because they're overstimulated with information. And then New Age sciences rebrand this feeling overwhelmed with information and all sorts of things. It rebrands them into new ways to label people, like ADHD or all sorts of other things that don't necessarily have a scientific foundation. Yes, a lot of those feel very well structured and logical, but when you ask yourself why hasn't ADHD existed 100 years ago, it was because schooling systems didn't have enough to teach you as they do nowadays, and there's not that much of an informational bombardment as you have nowadays. When society and the press fails with a certain piece of news, they no longer need to censor it. They'll just use the AI to bombard everyone with all sorts of similar like news. Whether it was a certain value, they will create all sorts of versions of that piece of news where the value is higher or smaller, or and then afterwards will come a batch or a wave of pieces of news that will say that everything that crumbled your mind before already is fake news. Yes? And unfortunately, this is a trend that will keep going on. Why people feel tired is because of mental fatigue. People are being bombarded with all sorts of information and they are not necessarily too conscious of that because information exists at subtle levels. Even the antennae and the such that you have around you, they send and they transmit messages that your brain can catch. Because don't forget, your brain functions in 11 dimensions. But the very simple point is, your brain catches those bits of information and can understand some of those. Even if it doesn't understand those, it is just like being bombarded with energy. Imagine that your brain also has a cache memory, just like your computer, just like machines. And when that cache memory gets filled, then the machine will simply crumble. It cannot operate anymore because it needs that memory to be freed. You have such a freeing process going on in your head as well. It goes on naturally while you sleep. But the problem is, the more your mind gets filled with such garbled, with such garbage, the problem is you'll find it harder to sleep. You'll find it harder to concentrate. And a death cult society obviously craves that. It doesn't want you to think for yourself, yes? Because peace can also make profits, but it allows everyone to make profits. And a sick society definitely doesn't want that. A sick society doesn't want small people to do their own businesses. A sick society always wants you to be the slave of a bigger power. Why would it be worth trying to do something when someone can provide? Yes, but the question is, what do you do if that person or that entity, that corporation or, well, foreign power suddenly decides that you are no longer worthy of being provided? Isn't that the ultimate slavery in the end? What will you do? Your population will starve, and when, well, there will be people who will be thrown away from a government, and the same power that refused to feed you, well, they will give you their new puppets. They will teach you that they are your new saviors, and then you will live as the same slave as you've always lived. If you took some attention to look at how trends go in this society, you will see that each and every generation more or less has been fooled somewhat like this, with bigger or smaller events. War is not something that goes only on the military level, it goes on the hearts and minds of people as well. Because in the end, mass media is just that, convincing people that a certain reality is the only reality that there can be. So, this is one of the reasons why it is far more profitable for a sick society to keep you always in bondage, always in fear, always shaking and quaking, because that will make you very sick in time, and it also will make you sickly. You will become sick faster and faster, which will feed the pharmaceutical industry. Yes? And, well, guess what the trend is? Well, now there's this trend where people, if they don't want to live, well, they can choose to, commit, guided suicide. Yes, that is murder. It is not guided suicide. You're just pretending to be, you're just pretending to be kind with someone. You're just ending someone's life. That is a murder. You will pay for that karmically, sooner or later. Maybe in this life or another life. But that is murder because you are technically helping someone take their own lives. You're taking part in their own self destruction instead of investing into curing people. Yes, it is much better to keep people frustrated and confused because they are easier to rule. Yes, peace allows love to flourish, it allows relationships to flourish. Yes, not just romantic ones. And when people unite, they can create collectives that are hard to pull down, that are hard to dismantle. It is always a big problem for such societies when a leader stems. Yes, because when they appear, they can guide the masses towards other means through life, not just being yet a new boss that gives order and expects everyone to follow. So hopefully this video raised a bit of awareness. You're appreciated. Take care. Enjoy life. This being said, Ferenc Board signing out.